Hi, I'm Nicole Jones, and welcome back to Boss Up, where we talk about how to start, grow, and sustain your business. I am super excited to have with me a very special guest today. He is going to talk about all things in regards to being a lawyer, as well as working with Steve Harvey Global Network, Mr. Brandon Williams.
Thank you, Nicole. Wonderful intro. I'm glad to be here, and it's a pleasure of mine to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited you're here. There's a lot of things I want to cover today. I'll be going back and forth on my phone with a few questions.
Sure.
But tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get started. You are working with the Steve Harvey. How did you get your start in actually becoming a lawyer before actually joining his team?
Yes. So, as we were kind of talking in the intro, this is so important to me. I'm from here, so I'm from this side of town. I grew up Flat Shoals Parkway, Wesley Chapel, Kelly Chapel. This was my home. So, to be back here and with you all is just it's kind of like a homecoming. So this is what made me. This is what birthed me. This is what gave me my start. And I say that mostly because, there's a lot of people that will think that I come from some, great background in Los Angeles or whatever. No, this was me. I came from these schools. I went to elementary school here. I went to high school here. I went to Chapel Hill. Then I went to Southwest DeKalb. And then I went to Morehouse. And then I went to Emory Law School. So my start was really here. And then, I've continued to matriculate through the city of Atlanta. And then now, it's gone to a global perspective. But the biggest thing and the most important thing is this is my origin. This is where I learned how to be me. I learned who I was. I learned all the things that kind of propel me to do the things that I do on a daily basis to boss up, so to speak. I learned them here. So this is the place that I came from. So I went to Emory Law School, and then I was a corporate lawyer at a big law firm here in the city, Austin and Byrd. So it's like one of the number one or two firms in the city, biggest firm in the Southeast. And from there, I kind of just continued to grow. I did that for 15 years. And then, one day, Steve Harvey was a client of mine there, and I wasn't even an entertainment lawyer, which is, surprising to some. But I had a ton of skills that I think I, gathered and gained over time. And one day he called me on a Saturday in like October of 2016. And he asked me, he said, Brandon, have you ever thought about doing something different? And I said, no, not really. I love what I do. And he said, no, I'm asking you a different question. He said, have you ever thought about working for me? And I said, I do work for you. And he said, no, you're still not understanding what I'm asking you. And he said, no, I want you to leave your firm and come work for me. And
Mind you, you're making, over $100 billion mergers,
yeah,
acquisitions.
yeah,
And he's like,
yeah.
I want you to leave that.
Yeah, and that was different.
Yeah.
But I felt like, and ultimately what it came down to, Nicole, was I felt like I would have more regrets staying at the firm than I would leaving. And I felt like, when I did the kind of pros and cons on a piece of paper, I felt like, if I didn't leave, I would always be asking myself, should I have? I did not feel like I would be asking that same question if I left. And so ultimately, I made the decision to leave. I talked it over with my wife, and she was supportive, which was even more important. And so I uprooted my life. Again, I told you I was from here, so all of a sudden I was in LA all the time. My family was here. I was commuting every week to Los Angeles, which obviously puts a strain on a lot of your family life, your home life. But it was a kind of a necessary thing for me, and it was ultimately the right decision for me. And that was kind of my path to get there. You can certainly ask me any questions about there's more to the narrative than that, but I just wanted to at least lay it out for you in terms of how the start got there and then, how I got here today.
That is a beautiful story. I feel like that's the epitome of boss up. Like that taking that leap of faith and actually calculated risk
Yeah.
in terms of, making this shift from this cushy opportunity, cushy job that I know I'm very familiar with and I'm
Sure.
doing amazing at and excelling in. But let me then take this opportunity that's over here because it's the what ifs
Yeah.
that kind of allowing you to move forward. And then having that support is a huge piece of
Yeah.
actually making that leap.
Absolutely.
So in terms of making that professional shift, what did you learn about yourself in that moment and in that time in terms of going from Alston and Bird? You know, you're well known here, your wards, and,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of great accounts, but then going to traveling back and forth.
So, you know, it's an interesting question. I was having this discussion with someone recently, and the biggest thing that I learned about myself was doesn't matter like what environment and what position that I'm put in, I will survive and thrive. Because the reason I say that that's the lesson I learned about myself is it wasn't perfect, right? Like as you mentioned, I'm going from an organization and a thing that has all the resources in the world.
Yep.
I've got 3 assistants. I've got people to answer the phone. I've got, you know, a copy center that makes copies. If I have a problem, my email, like it just, you know, I call somebody and it just
You had it
automatically
made,
gets fixed.
basically.
Yeah, I had it made. And you know, we had a dining room. So we had a daycare. I mean, every resource that you could ever have at your disposal, the firm had. And then you go to Steve Harvey, who is a known commodity to the world, and certainly to folks that look like us. We've known Steve Harvey because we grew up with Steve Harvey. But the organization itself is a baby, right? It's like in terms of the corporate structure of it all, it's a startup. And so the resources are different. And then, you know, the just the whole concept of it is different. And, you know, so that part of it was I had to learn how to be in an environment and adapt to, it's not perfect. And that you don't have a million resources at your disposal. But I realized that, like, you know, you could take me out of the city, you know, you can take me out of Atlanta, you can put me in Los Angeles, you can take me to New York, you can put me in Africa, you can put me in the Middle East, and like I will find a way to not only survive, I will find a way to thrive, because this was much of my cocoon, right? Like if I was a caterpillar, Atlanta was my like protection. I knew people, I knew everybody, and so when you go to LA and you go to these other countries, you don't have that same protection. Mm-hmm. And you've got to figure out how to, you know, thrive in that environment too.
Yeah, you almost become vulnerable in a sense. It's like, okay, now I feel seen.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? Like, now I'm going to be tested in ways that I haven't before because I've always been in this, like you said, this cocoon.
Yeah. So when you take it out and like you put me in the elements, right? So the cocoon is no longer in the whatever protected and it's dry and the butterfly, like that was all over it. It was like lightning. It was thunder. It was snow. And you've got to find a way like to, okay, I have to brush myself off. I've got to figure out, I've got to fall. Nothing's going to be right. And then, you know, you're working around different people. I worked at the same firm for 15 years. I went to Emory Law School. I went to Morehouse. It was always this like kind of too perfect scenario. And then you've got to realize it's like, okay, well, I've got to figure out something different about myself. And I'm not protected anymore. And I still have to find a way. You know, my wife was pregnant at the time with our first child. And so it was like everything was happening, this upheaval. But by, you know, the grace of God, faith, strength, you know, I know how to persevere and I know how to not give up.
As far as actually being a part of the fraternity versus wanting to be in the fraternity, would you say that your outlook on your environment is different?
Actually being in the organization now, you're exposed to everything.
This is the most serious thing that I have ever been a part of. When we say this is a serious matter, we are not playing.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
So, in terms of making that professional shift, what did you learn about yourself in that moment?
There were times and nights. I mean, I would be flying back on red eyes coming back from Los Angeles. And I remember one time I was just like, I just wanted to cry. And I was like, did I make a mistake? And ultimately, like, what I really had to do, I came home and I told my wife, I said, hey, listen, I've got to leave Atlanta. And what I mean by that is there were still so many things that were pulling me back, and it still felt like a protection, right? So when I would come back, it would make me feel like I still have this covering. And what I meant by to that, she's like, you have left, you know, and I was like, you have a place in LA? Like, I was like, no. I was like, I have to understand that Atlanta's gone, and I don't have that as a fallback. There is no plan B. There was only a plan A, and plan A was the job that you are doing is in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so I didn't go out when I was in Atlanta anymore. I would come home and I would just be at home. I would come home and just be with my daughter and be with my wife. And the reason for that for me was I had to realize this was no more.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't have this as an option. And when you take away all of your options, then you realize, like, I have to make this work. And so when there were no more options, it was like, this is it. And then so after like 6 months, I realized, like, okay. And when that mental switch, when I did that, it changed everything for me, because I realized that, like, no, you don't get to come back. You know, it was always, I was still friends with people at the firm, and they were like, oh, your seat is still available. Your office is still available. And in your mind, like, you start to think that, like, that's an option, but that means that you're not giving everything that you have to the opportunity that God's given to you and the thing that's in present. So you're sort of like kind of like bilateral, but you got to be like unilateral, because there is no going back. There is no, oh, I can still kind of go back there. No, it's one way, and that's how I've lived my life. Is like, I don't have a plan B. Yeah. And being in that, when you don't have a plan B in your mind, there's no going back. So you got to make this work. Yeah. And so that's ultimately what I came to. It's what, really was important to me. And then that's when everything started to change and the opportunity started to change, and my mindset, it was really just started in my mind. Because when I removed myself from Atlanta and said, like, this isn't something that's possible anymore, it forced me to be like, okay, overcome that. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, these doors started opening. These windows started opening. And it's like, okay, well, this is how you advance at this part. This is how you advance at that part. It's only like, it's entertainment. It's not rocket science. It's not neurosurgery. You know what I mean? So I'm like, it's reading, and it's contracts, and it's people. And so that was really like how I ultimately decided that this was the way, was take away any other options and go full throttle with the decision that you made, and that's where you go.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That was a very real expression of what you were actually going through those moments. It almost sounds like a book.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like you should be writing a book. But those are very real moments.
Yeah.
And I think that's for anybody who's making those type of transitions in life, especially if you're on your way from, having those opportunities. Everything was made, everything was laid out for you in one position, to now go to the complete unknown. You're removed from your safety net, and you have to 100% commit to that opportunity. You can't go 50%, because there's no such thing as 50% faith. Yeah. So in those ways, you felt, it sounded like, crumbled in a sense, or at a loss, because you mentioned that you would at one point came back crying, and then
Yeah.
there's like just tears of just confusion at some point.
Sure.
And you have to step back and think, this is something that I need to do 100% in order for this to work, and I have to be completely uncomfortable in order for this to actually work the way that I envision it and the way that Steve sees me in this position.
Yeah, and listen, that is 100% it.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the first weeks I was in LA, and I was just so discombobulated, right? Like, I had a place in LA, and like, you had to have these like key cards to get into the complex and like all this stuff, and it was just, I was so like just unnerved. And because again, Atlanta was a comfort zone. I knew which highway I was gonna take. I knew what time I was gonna be at this place and how long it took to get to this place. And in LA, I didn't know anything. I didn't know where to go. I didn't even know, I didn't know anything. And so I remember this one night, it was like I left the office at like 11:30 at night, and I got to my place and I couldn't find the key card, so I couldn't get into my apartment. And I was just like so frustrated. I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And again, the thing that I would tell people is like that whether it's a word or not, but that discomfort is right before like a breakthrough. Right?
Yes,
Like,
yes.
I'll never forget, one of the best books I've ever read is The Alchemist, and it talks about your personal legend and this path that this young gentleman was making, and what it meant by it was like your calling is like the thing that you were born to do. And what it talks about is that frustrating moment, or the moment where you feel like everything is against me, nothing's going right. And that's the moment where you have to try your best and try your hardest. So it was like when I felt like everything started working against, it's like, okay, I'm on the right path. Like, this is,
You're like, something's about to happen after
something's
this.
about to happen
Like, I'm going to
from
wait
this.
for it.
And I'm going through that door, like, notwithstanding it looked like a black hole some days. And again, not because anything, the job is great. It was going good, but I was so uncomfortable because it was so new, and you go from, everybody, the people, who you're working on the opposite side of. You go from that, and it's like you're dealing with all these new people. You're dealing with all these new environments. You're dealing with all these new things. And then to make it even more so, is like you're by yourself. Your family's not there, right? Like part of my protection too is like I can come home to my wife and be like, whew, it's tough. It's frustrating, but there was nobody there. And I get home at 10 o'clock at night. It's 1 a.m. in Atlanta. I can't call her. Like, she's asleep, or she got the baby, she's dealing with the baby at 1 o'clock in the morning. Like, so it was almost like it was meant for me to be sequestered there, so I couldn't rely on anybody else. I couldn't rely on talking to this person and talking to that person. I wasn't talking to them like a ton of my friends from here, because again, I told you, I made myself get out of Atlanta because I felt like I just kept trying to protect myself. And so I was like, no, take the protection away. Face it. Feel it. And so that was what it was.
That is so real.
Yeah.
That is so real. I love that.
Meet the Scan, a simple procedure whose mission is to detect lung cancer early.
I'm here to save you!
But I feel fine.
That's great, but you may still be at high risk for lung cancer.
Oh man, that's a new fence.
If you smoke, early detection could save your life. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
One thing that's come up in the midst of this pandemic is that people have been getting retrained, going into different careers, really making a pivot in the midst of a pandemic.
The advice I would offer to any young person that has started on a path, they're pulled or they see some interest somewhere else, I would tell them, do not turn your back on that. I started off as a receptionist, $7.50 an hour. And I don't make $7.50 an hour now.
touch on a little bit when you actually were in LA
Yeah.
and actually working with the team and
Yeah.
what you were able to offer in terms of, you
Yeah.
know, you started with the network or the global,
Yeah.
you know, company, and you were able to identify fairly quickly, I did a little research, that Steve Harvey does a lot of great things.
Yeah.
And a lot of great things are a little all over the place. So
Yeah.
you said, you know, in this moment, I see there's an opportunity for a holding company.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the premise of, for those that are watching that are business owners, the premise of a holding company and why you saw and identified that so quickly within that network?
Yeah, I felt like, you know, I mean, he was a client of mine previously, and I did a lot of work just structure-wise, making sure all the companies were formed right, making sure they all had bylaws, making sure shareholders' agreements were in place. And I never forget, I remember, you know, early on when he and I were working, this was still when I was at the firm, I basically had done this project where I put like all 20 of his companies together. Like, and I remember I presented this notebook. It was about, you know, 3 inches thick, and it had all these like companies. And he was like, "Oh my God, like this is amazing. Like I've never had this kind of organization." So what I think that I brought is, you know, I had worked for companies and people and clients, and, you know, I know what the right stuff looks like for CEOs and for business people with their company. I know what structure is, right? And so what I think I have and can bring and brought to the organization was some of that professionalism, some of that, you know, all the elements were there for the cake. The ingredients were there. It was just like you had to bring the eggs and the flour and the sugar and the milk and all that stuff together and then put it in the oven, right? It was like, it was there. It was just a matter of like, okay, well, let me put a little bit of vanilla extract in there. Let me do this, and then I need the oven to be on 350 or 375. And then, so you have this base of stuff, and it just wasn't together. And I think that I brought kind of that chef's touch and said, all right, well, I see it all here. I know it's all there. So when you look at all these companies and you're like, well, but they still need one thing that brings them together. And that one thing in my mind was this holding company. And it was this kind of one parent company that brings them all and houses all of them. And I think really the purpose was, you know, you don't have to do it this way, but I just felt like we had so many different, you know, kind of mini organizations, and you wanted them to be housed under something. So some of it was tax related. You know, we were in LA, and in California, which is very like, you know, tax heavy. And so you wanted to make sure stuff was just done right. So, but at the end of the day, like, it was no magic on my part. It was just like I had seen what it should look like. And so taking what might have been just, again, these kind of disparate, this entity over here, and if we didn't need that okay, let's shut that entity down. Like, all right, well, what are we really doing with this one? Is this really a business, or is this just a hobby? Like, I mean, it was just like those types of things, making sure that we were all unified and going in one kind of direction. And then that's, you know, where, you know, working alongside a lot of people, working alongside like consultants that we had, working alongside, you know, super smart people who are in finance, and just talking to them daily about like, what do we do? How do we do this in a way that makes this, you know, structure work? And, you know, it isn't just me, right? Like, and that's the thing that's important that people know is like, I've got, you know, a staff. We're a lean staff, but there's multiple people that provide insight and support for me and with me. It's not like I'm not a autocratic person. I'm a democratic person where I take input from, that's my leadership style. It's like, I don't have all the answers, and I don't want to have all the answers. I want other people who we have that work for us or are hired by us to have input. I'm not one of these people who's like, it's got to be done this way. Do I have thoughts? Absolutely. But I'm an inclusionary person. That's my spirit. That's who I am. So when you have it that way and you decide to do something, everybody has input. And then we say that this is the direction we're going, this is why. And all of a sudden, you've got kind of this, you look up and you're like, oh, it's coming together. It's coming together. It's coming together. And you're working at it every day, right? And, you know, the thing that people have to understand, I mean, Austin & Bird has been around, I'll use it as an example, and I've told this to people. Austin & Bird has been around 120 years or whatever. I don't know how long it's been, but it's a long time. And the reason they have all the stuff is because of how long they've been in existence. If you're Steve Harvey, you're first generation, right? This is all happening real time. He's built this empire in the last like 20 years. So of course it's not going to be perfect. That's the whole point. We have to learn, and I think again, a lot of what I say that when I say we, I'm talking about people that look like you and I, and people that are watching this that look like you and I, is that you do have to give yourself a little bit of grace in that we think that we're supposed to look like Coca-Cola's company from the jump. You can have a vision towards that. You can decide that I want to be Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's been around since like 1846 or something. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, these companies have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So for every like Facebook, which is an anomaly, it's new technology, most of these companies that everybody's striving to be, they've done it for so long and made mistakes along the way, continue to make mistakes. So it's like, it takes time.
Yeah, in some cases it may seem like they're light years ahead because we've been so far behind in some of those areas. Now we're catching up, you know, in warp speed and trying to make up for that time lost and still build an empire.
Just you gotta sometimes give yourself grace and understand that, you know, they didn't start just yesterday either, and it takes time. And if you understand that, and that it's a real process and it doesn't happen overnight. The old saying is Rome wasn't built in, it's for real, because it wasn't, right? Like you go to some of these other countries and you go to Paris or you go to some of these places in Europe and like these buildings, and they've got these unbelievable buildings, and it's like built in like the 1400s. You go to Barcelona and you see these places. Well, yeah, like Atlanta looks different because Atlanta hasn't existed since 1457. Like, so we don't have buildings that look like that, right? We got stuff that started, like you talked about. You got here 1996. If you came to Atlanta before 1996, it's a whole different place. And so look at the growth of it now. Imagine what it will look like in 50 years or 200 years. And that's how you get there. It is day to day, block by block, working at it, and just understand it takes time.
I think that's great advice. I think that's really good because in a lot of cases we have entrepreneurs, business owners that are in a place where they actually want to continue to grow and expand, and they are somewhat discouraged or frustrated with the fact that they're not at the growth level they expect to be at. So I think what you just said is really pivotal in that it's a process.
It's a process.
It takes time in terms of actually being able to get to where you want to be in your company. Again, we're trying to catch up with a lot of different legalities. We're trying to keep up with certain paperwork. We're trying to keep up with other competitors who might be light years ahead of us. But we're just getting up to speed because we're learning, especially as a culture, Black culture, what this means to us and how this can be sustainable in our businesses.
100%. And like the thing that I think bring and brought is that idea that, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. And I'm okay with that. Like I get that it takes time. It's almost like I was listening to LeBron James speak about, you know, the way that he approaches a season and the way that he approaches a game. And he's like, he builds, right? It doesn't happen game one. It doesn't happen week one. It's a process over the season. The team builds over the course of a season. Our season may be 5 years. It may be 20 years. And it might not be for you. It might be that you're doing this for another generation. You're starting it, you're building a base and a platform. But it may be that somebody else reaps some triple benefit that you didn't see. And so if you're open to the fact that like it does take time, you have some patience, you have some resolve, then, you know, one day you realize it's like you've actually built something.
Thank you guys for tuning in. This was actually going to be part 1 of 2-parters. So Brandon Williams, thank you for being here today to share your information.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, thank you. So you guys don't go anywhere because there's more information. Make sure you stay tuned. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
Looking at those areas of how you became who you became, and then looking at what were all the influxes that interfered with all of the stuff. We don't like to do that. That's too much work, Selena. Sometimes you have to take it in small pieces, in small fragments. You can't just run through it and say, okay, let's merrily do this work. It'll be fun. No, it's not fun work. It's painful. But we have to do it to get through it.